The gas station lights flickered like they were about to give up, buzzing weakly against the coming dark. Rain soaked the asphalt, turning the ground into a black mirror that reflected neon signs and the slow roll of distant thunder. Engines idled under the canopy, low and impatient. Across the street, a battered pickup sat too still, watching. Inside the station, Lena Cross fought to pull air into her lungs while her son Noah clutched her sleeve with both hands, his knuckles white. Fear had already arrived. It always did before he did. Then she saw it. A black luxury sedan easing closer, smooth and confident, like it owned the road and everyone on it. Panic slammed into instinct. Lena knew the pattern. She knew the ending. She also knew she could not survive another night of silence. Her hands shook as she tore a receipt, scribbling words that barely held together. She didn't ask for rescue. She asked for witnesses. As she passed a tattooed biker at the counter, Rook Calder, leather worn smooth by miles, she pressed the paper into his palm and walked out without looking back. Rook unfolded the note. It promised death by morning. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If this story hits you, tap subscribe. Rook Calder was the kind of man people noticed without knowing why. He did not swagger. He did not posture. He simply existed with a weight that came from surviving things most men never talked about. As a senior member of the Iron Covenant Motorcycle Club, Rook rode with quiet authority, the kind earned through consistency rather than volume. His leather vest was worn thin at the edges, patches faded by sun and rain, not replaced because history mattered. Scars lined his forearms and neck, pale against dark ink, each one a chapter he never explained. Redemption was the engine that drove him now. Not pride, not anger. He showed up because someone once showed up for him when he was broken enough to disappear. The Iron Covenant was not chaos wrapped in chrome. It was discipline forged in shared loss. At its center stood Axel Kane, the road captain, a man who thought 3 moves ahead and never forgot the cost of mistakes. Axel had buried family because no one intervened soon enough, and that grief sharpened his sense of justice into something precise and unforgiving. When lines were crossed, he did not rage. He responded. Plans, routes, contingencies. Everything had purpose under his watch. Grim Lawson moved differently from the rest. Quiet. Watchful. A former investigator who left the badge behind but kept the instincts, Grim saw patterns where others saw coincidence. He listened more than he spoke, cataloged details, remembered timelines. When something felt off, it usually was. Grim did not chase answers loudly. He waited for them to surface, then pinned them down with evidence that could not be ignored. Bear Holt was impossible to miss. Massive shoulders, thick arms, a beard that made strangers cross the street. But when children were near, Bear softened in a way that felt almost surreal. He spoke gently, knelt to their level, made himself smaller without losing strength. Before the club, he had been a counselor. After the club, he still was. Threats hit him like waves against stone, but fear in a child's eyes cut deep enough to demand protection. Doc Mercer carried himself like a man who had seen too much blood to ever be casual about it again. A former combat medic turned emergency responder, Doc did not panic. He assessed. He stabilized. Whether it was physical injury or shock locking someone's body in place, Doc knew how to bring people back to themselves. He believed survival was not just about living through the moment, but about being functional afterward. Ren Calder was Rook's sister, and in many ways, his mirror. Where he worked in shadows and presence, she worked in daylight and law. A family law attorney with a reputation for being relentless but fair, Ren understood systems predators used and how to dismantle them piece by piece. She translated protection into paperwork, safety into court orders, and fear into admissible truth. She was the bridge between the road and the courtroom, and she never forgot who she was fighting for. Lena Cross stood in sharp contrast to the leather and steel around her. She was a survivor worn thin by years of control, her strength quiet but stubborn. Bruises healed, fear lingered. Still, she endured, not because she believed she deserved better, but because her son did. Noah carried the kind of silence that came from seeing too much, too early. His eyes missed nothing. His wisdom was not learned, it was forced. He understood moods, footsteps, and tone in ways no child should. Caleb Vane was the kind of man communities trusted without question. His suit was always pressed, his smile practiced and warm. He shook hands, donated generously, spoke about values and responsibility. Behind closed doors, he weaponized everything he had built. Institutions bent for him. Intimidation followed him. His cruelty thrived in private, protected by reputation and disbelief. He did not see people as people. He saw them as possessions that resisted. The world they moved through felt heavy with memory. Gas stations buzzing under failing lights. A steel-walled clubhouse that smelled of oil and coffee, lined with photos of the fallen. Apartment hallways where fears soaked into the paint. Courtrooms thick with lies and polite disbelief. And beyond it all, a remote cabin surrounded by trees that remembered every secret whispered among them. The Iron Covenant believed in witness, restraint, and unity. They did not chase chaos. They did not confuse noise with strength. When things went wrong, they showed up. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Rook Calder did not move fast for anything anymore, not for insults. Not for threats. Not even for the kind of trouble that used to find him like a magnet when he was younger and hungry for violence. These days, he moved with the patience of a man who had learned that rushing only made mistakes louder. So when the woman in the gas station pressed a damp receipt into his palm and walked out like her feet were on fire, he almost didn't look down right away. He had seen strangers do strange things. People were unpredictable around bikers. Some were bold when they should have been cautious. Some were cautious when they should have been screaming. But this wasn't that. He felt it before he read it. The paper was creased hard, sweat softened, and held the way you held a confession you couldn't take back. Rook stepped out under the canopy, rain tapping against steel and plastic, and he unfolded the receipt with 2 fingers like it might cut him. The words weren't long. They didn't need to be. A name, a time, an address, a warning. Not a plea. A countdown. The message didn't say, "Help me." It didn't even say, "Save me." It said something colder and more terrifying, because it carried certainty. It carried a schedule. It promised blood by morning. Rook's eyes swept the lot like they belonged to someone else. He saw the usual things. An older couple filling up, a teenager wiping the inside of a windshield, a truck driver leaning against his cab smoking like the world didn't touch him. And then he saw what didn't fit. A black luxury sedan at the edge of the street, not pulling in, not leaving, just existing, like a shadow that had learned to wear expensive paint. It wasn't obvious enough to draw attention from anyone else. That's what made it dangerous. It sat there as if it had all night. As if it would have all night. The note had given Rook a time and a place, but the woman's face had given him the rest. He'd seen fear before. He'd worn it. He'd watched it hollow out good men and turn bad men into gods. This wasn't fear that came from imagination. This was fear that came from memory. He stepped into the wind by the pumps, rain cold on his knuckles, and read it again. The handwriting was jagged, carved into the paper like the pen had been a blade. Whoever wrote it had pressed so hard the ink bled through. That detail mattered to him. It meant her hands weren't just shaking. They were fighting to stay steady. Fighting to do one thing right before time ran out. That kind of desperation didn't come from drama. It came from survival. Rook's throat tightened, and something old stirred in his chest, something he didn't like to wake up because it brought ghosts with it. For a second, he wasn't standing at a gas station. He was back in a different life. A different version of himself. He remembered a night behind a closed repair shop, the stink of spilled liquor and gasoline mixing in the air. He remembered sitting on a curb with his head in his hands, convinced the world would be better without him in it. He'd been the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid back then, not because of leather or ink, but because his eyes were empty and hungry. And then a biker named Tommy Valdez had shown up. No lecture, no pity, no holy words. Just a man on 2 wheels who stopped and stayed when stopping made no sense. Tommy had sat beside him, passed him a bottle of water instead of whiskey, and said one simple thing that had changed Rook's life. "You don't get to quit alone." That was it. That was the rope. That was the reason Rook was still breathing years later. Now he was holding another rope. A thin strip of receipt paper. A stranger's last move before the trap snapped shut. He looked up again. The sedan was still there. The woman Lena Cross, the note had named her, had already driven off. Rook could still picture the way she'd avoided looking at him, like eye contact might make her break apart right there between the candy rack and the coffee urn. He could still see the boy beside her, Noah's small hands gripping fabric like it was the only safe thing in the world. That image stayed. It rooted itself deep. Rook didn't question whether it was his problem. He didn't debate risk. He didn't talk himself into walking away. Because he knew exactly what happened when everyone assumed someone else would handle it. He stepped toward his bike, the engine still ticking from the ride, and he pulled his phone from inside his vest. His thumb hovered over the contact he didn't call unless it mattered. Axel Kane. When Axel answered, his voice was low and sharp, the sound of a man already awake to the world's ugliness. Talk. Rook didn't waste words. I got a note. Silence on the other end, but not confusion. Axel understood notes. Understood coded warnings and quiet pleas. The club had lived long enough to learn the language of people who couldn't scream. Rook read it out loud, each word heavy. Name. Time. Address. Threat. When he finished, Axel didn't ask questions like a civilian would. He asked one, "You believe it?" Rook stared at the black sedan again. "Yeah." Axel's breath went slow. "Then we move." That was all. No discussion. No vote. No speeches about legality or risk. Those conversations mattered later. First, you showed up. First, you made sure someone didn't disappear in the dark while everyone slept. Rook heard movement on Axel's end boots, maybe, or a chair scraping. Axel was already shifting into command mode, the way a road captain did when something needed to happen clean and fast. "I'll make the calls," Axel said. "You stay on it. Eyes open. Don't get dragged into a stupid play." "I'm not looking for a fight," Rook said. "I know," Axel replied. "That's why I'm sending you." The call ended, but the weight didn't lift. It settled deeper. Rook slid his phone away and sat on his bike without starting it. For a moment he listened. Rain. Engines. A distant siren somewhere in town. The world still turning like it didn't care, but now the clock was ticking, and he could feel every second like a pulse under his skin. The stakes weren't abstract. They weren't dramatic. They were simple in the ugliest way. If the Iron Covenant ignored this note, Lena Cross and her boy would vanish behind a clean smile and a respected name. Maybe she'd end up missing. Maybe she'd end up unstable. Maybe she'd end up dead, and the story would be told in polite language that made it easier for people to swallow. If they acted, they would be challenging something more dangerous than a thug in an alley. They would be challenging a man protected by status. Men like Caleb Vane didn't rely on fists alone. They relied on disbelief. They relied on the system bending without making noise. They relied on the fact that when a woman said, "He will kill me," people heard, "She's being dramatic." And when a child flinched, people called it shyness. Rook knew the type. The polished predator. The kind of man who could hurt you and then stand in public the next day holding a door open for an elderly woman, smiling for praise. The kind of man who could make you look like the problem while he played savior. That was what made this different. This wasn't a street war. This was a war against a mask. And masks only came off when there were witnesses. As the sky darkened, Rook's phone buzzed again, one message after another, short and blunt, the kind of communication bikers used when the mission mattered more than the talk. Axel had summoned the Covenant. Word went out like a spark hitting dry grass. Men and women left jobs, left dinners, left warm beds. They didn't ask for the whole story yet. They didn't need the details to understand the heart of it. Somebody was trapped. Somebody was counting down to morning, and somebody needed a wall of witnesses strong enough to make a predator hesitate. By the time the first engines began to arrive in the distance, the rain had slowed, but the air still smelled like electricity. Headlights cut through the dusk like knives. One bike, then another. Then a line of them, rolling in steady and controlled, not roaring for attention, but arriving like a verdict. Rook watched them pull in brothers and sisters in worn leather, heavy with ink, faces set hard. Not excited, not wild. Focused. Axel arrived last, as he often did, because a leader never rushed in blind. He parked, dismounted, and walked to Rook without wasted motion. His eyes went to the street first, scanning for that sedan. Rook nodded toward it. That's him watching. Axel's jaw tightened. Good. Let him watch. Axel looked at the note one more time, then folded it carefully like it was evidence, not paper. He slipped it into an inner pocket. Here's the truth, Axel said, voice low enough that only Rook heard. If we do nothing, we're part of what happens to her. Rook met his gaze. Yeah. Axel turned toward the arriving bikes. More headlights were coming. More engines. The Covenant was building a presence that would be impossible to ignore. Then we show up, Axel said. And we make sure the world sees. That was the point of no return. By nightfall, the club was in motion, and walking away was no longer an option, because silence had already failed too many times, and Rook Calder refused to let this woman's last move become her last breath. Axel Kane didn't run his club like a bar fight waiting to happen. He ran it like a mission. When the Iron Covenant gathered, it wasn't a swarm. It was a formation. They met in the steel-walled clubhouse on the edge of town, a place that smelled like oil, coffee, and old rain trapped in leather. Flags hung from the rafters, not for decoration but for remembrance. Photos lined one wall, faces of people they had buried, brothers who didn't get second chances, sisters who never made it home. The room wasn't loud. It wasn't rowdy. It was focused. Axel stood at the center with the receipt note folded in his hand like it weighed more than paper. We don't touch him unless we have to, he said. We don't threaten. We don't posture. We witness. We record. We stay clean. Rook watched the room as Axel spoke. Grim Lawson leaned against a tool bench, arms crossed, eyes half-lidded like he was already building timelines in his head. Bear Holt sat in a chair that looked too small for him, hands folded, calm as a mountain. Dot Mercer checked his bag out of habit, making sure it was stocked like trouble was guaranteed. Wren Calder wasn't there yet. She was still in the world of courtrooms and paperwork, but she was already on speakerphone, listening. Axel's rules came out simple and hard. Cameras on at all times. No one goes anywhere alone. No touching, unless it's to protect. If law enforcement shows up, respect the badge and let the truth do the damage. This wasn't about being feared. It was about being undeniable. Because predators like Caleb Vane thrived in shadows and stories. The Covenant was going to drag him into daylight and make him explain himself in front of witnesses who wouldn't blink. Grim had already started digging. In the back of the clubhouse, he sat with a laptop and a yellow legal pad, scribbling notes in clean lines. Names, addresses, restraining orders that appeared and vanished. Complaints that never became cases. A pattern like footprints circling the same grave. He's careful, Grim said without looking up. Not smart. Careful. That's worse. Rook didn't ask what he meant. He understood. A smart man made mistakes. A careful man learned how not to leave bruises where cameras could see. Learned how to smile through accusations. Learned how to turn every victim into a liar before they even spoke. By the time the club rolled out to Lena Cross's apartment complex, the sky had gone dark enough that streetlights looked tired. The building sat in a cluster of others, all the same dull color, all smelling faintly of wet concrete and old cooking grease. It wasn't a place people noticed. That was why men like Caleb chose it. Invisible places were easier to control. The Covenant didn't crowd the lot like a riot. They lined bikes neatly, spaced with purpose. Engines shut down. Silence took over. Rook and Axel went up first with Bear and Doc behind them. No one else followed. Not yet. Not until they knew what they were walking into. Lena opened the door with the chain still latched. Her face was pale, eyes sunken like she hadn't slept in days. She looked at Rook and didn't know whether to trust him or fear him. The world had trained her to fear men who looked like him. Then she saw the calm in his eyes. Not hunger. Not excitement, just presence. You wrote the note, Rook said quietly. Her lips trembled. He's coming. Noah stood behind her, half hidden, clutching a small toy car with one missing wheel, his eyes locked on Bear first, because Bear was the biggest. Children always looked at the biggest threat first. It was instinct. Bear didn't move fast. He lowered himself slowly, bending his knees until he was at Noah's level. The gesture made the hallway feel less tight. "Hey, little man," Bear said, voice gentle, like he used with kids who came into his office with bruises nobody explained. "I'm Bear. I look scary, but I'm not here to scare you." Noah didn't speak. He just stared. His gaze flicked over Bear's tattoos, over the hard lines of his face, then back to his eyes. Children could read eyes better than adults. Noah's shoulders loosened a fraction. Bear nodded toward the toy car. "That thing's been through some miles." Noah hesitated, then held it up, like offering proof that he existed. Bear smiled, small and honest. "We'll get you a new wheel for it. But for now, you stick close to your mom, all right?" Noah nodded once. That nod carried a weight nobody in the hallway missed. It was the first time the boy had agreed to anything without fear tightening his throat. Inside the apartment, Lena didn't sit. She paced. Doc offered water, and she drank like she was trying to fill a hollow that wouldn't close. Rook watched the windows, the door, the way the air seemed to tighten every time a car passed outside. Axel stepped in close enough that only she heard him. "We're not here to fight," he told her. "We're here to make sure you're not alone when he tries to lie." Lena swallowed hard. "He always wins. He knows people. He knows the police. He knows what you've been taught," Axel cut in. "That nobody will believe you." Her eyes filled. She didn't wipe them. She couldn't spare a hand. Rook asked, "When is he supposed to come?" Lena glanced at the clock like it was a bomb timer. "Any minute." The Covenant moved then, quiet and controlled. Cameras came out. Phones were mounted. Grimm positioned 2 members outside, where they could see the entrance without blocking it. Axel placed others at the edges of the lot, not to intimidate, but to witness from every angle. Rook stayed near Lena because she was the reason they were there. Then the black luxury sedan slid into the parking lot like it belonged there. Caleb Vane stepped out, wearing a coat too expensive for the neighborhood. His hair was neat, his posture confident. He looked like a man who expected the world to open doors for him. At first, he smiled, warm, practiced, the kind that made strangers trust him instantly. Then he saw the bikes. He saw the leather. He saw the cameras. And for half a second, the smile faltered. Not fear, anger. The kind a man felt when his private control was being witnessed in public. He walked forward anyway, because that's what predators did. They didn't retreat. They escalated until the world bent again. "Lena," he called, voice smooth. "Let's not do this out here. You're upsetting our son." Lena's hands clenched. Her whole body wanted to shrink. Rook felt it. He stood beside her without touching, a wall made of patience. Caleb's eyes slid to Rook, then to Axel. "Who are these men?" Axel didn't answer like a thug. He answered like a witness. "People who were asked to be here." Caleb laughed softly, like the situation was ridiculous. "Asked? By who?" "Lena?" He stepped closer, hands spread, friendly. "You don't have to be afraid. Come on, we can talk." Then he noticed the phones aimed at him. The friendly tone sharpened just enough to cut. "You're recording me?" he said. Rook's voice stayed steady. "Everyone's recording." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "This is harassment." No one reacted. No one flinched. That unsettled him more than shouting ever could. He tried charm again, shifting his gaze toward the nearest biker like they were equals. "Look, I understand you guys have your lifestyle, but you don't want to get dragged into domestic drama. It's messy. It ruins reputations." Axel's face didn't change. "Then you shouldn't have brought mess into someone else's life." Caleb's jaw tightened. The mask slipped, then he forced it back into place. "I'm calling the police. This is ridiculous." "Do it," Axel said. Caleb did. When the police arrived, their headlights washed over leather vests and tattoos, and the officers' hands hovered near their belts out of habit. Caleb stepped forward immediately, relief flooding his posture like a man who believed the world had returned to its proper order. "Officer," he said, voice confident. Thank God you're here. These people are threatening my family. I'm Caleb Vane. He started listing names. Donors. Community boards. The kind of power that usually made uniforms soften. But the officer Rodriguez didn't soften. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the cameras. Then he looked at Caleb like he was just another man in a parking lot. "Sir," Rodriguez said, "step back while I speak to everyone." Caleb blinked, thrown off. "You don't understand. I know the chief." Rodriguez raised a hand. "Step back." The second officer, Chen, began checking IBs calmly, eyes alert but not hostile. The bikers complied without complaint. No sudden moves. No attitude. Just cooperation and cameras recording everything. Caleb's breathing changed. You could see it. The mask started to crack under the pressure of a system that wasn't bending. He turned toward Lena, voice dropping into something sharper. "Stop this, right now. You're embarrassing yourself." Lena flinched, and then Noah stepped forward. Small, quiet, brave in the way only children could be when they finally reached the edge of fear and found nothing left to lose. "He hurts my mom," Noah said, voice thin but clear. Every sound in the lot seemed to stop. Caleb froze, like the words had struck him in the chest. Noah looked at the officers, then at the cameras, then back at Caleb with eyes too old for his face. "He says if she tells, he'll make her disappear." The words weren't dramatic. They were simple. And that simplicity shattered every lie Caleb had built. For the first time, the world saw the monster's shadow behind the smile. Caleb's face twisted before he could stop it. Rage, pure and naked, flashing through the cracks. Everything shifted right there in the rain-lit parking lot because the Covenant hadn't come to fight. They had come to make truth impossible to bury. The parking lot changed everything, and it changed nothing. In the eyes of the law, Caleb Vane didn't become a monster just because a child spoke the truth in the rain. Not immediately. Systems didn't move at the speed of fear. They moved at the speed of paperwork, scheduling, and cautious people who hated risk more than they hated violence. The Iron Covenant knew that. Lena Cross learned it the hard way, because that night, after the officers separated everyone and took statements, Caleb didn't get handcuffed. He didn't get shoved into the back of a cruiser. He didn't even lose his calm in a way that would stick on paper. The rage that flashed through his mask had lasted only a moment long enough for the cameras to catch it, but not long enough for the world to understand what it meant. He walked away with his coat buttoned, his spine straight, his voice steady again by the time he reached his sedan. And the moment he vanished into the dark, the real punishment began. The next morning, Lena woke to find a note shoved under her apartment door. No signature, no threats written plainly. Just a sentence that felt like a knife pushed gently between ribs. You made a mistake. She didn't call the police. She didn't have the energy to explain how fear could be quiet and still deadly. She called Rook. By the time Rook arrived, he didn't need to see the paper to know what it said. He could read it in the way Lena's hands wouldn't stop shaking, in the way Noah's eyes kept flicking to the window like he expected the glass to shatter at any second. Fear had returned to the apartment like smoke, settling into corners and making the air hard to breathe. Axel moved the club into another phase. They didn't camp outside Lena's door like bodyguards looking for glory. They shifted tactics. 2 members rotated in and out, always present, never alone. Cameras stayed running when possible. Doc checked Lena's pulse, her breathing, her skin temperature like she was a patient pulled from cold water. Bear sat with Noah on the floor and fixed the toy car's wheel with a spare part he carried in his pocket like he'd known all along he'd need it. Grim worked the deeper angle. He didn't chase Caleb directly. He followed the ripples. The unexplained calls. The anonymous texts. The strange vehicles that appeared and disappeared on Lena's street. The way the same gray sedan showed up at the grocery store, then at the pharmacy, then idled outside the school lot like it was waiting for someone to blink. It was surveillance, clean and quiet, just close enough to be felt, just distant enough to deny. Caleb wasn't doing it himself. Men like him rarely got their hands dirty once the mask was cracked. They outsourced fear. They bought it. They rented it from people who didn't mind being the shadow as long as the money was real. Grim started pulling thread. He found patterns in bank records that weren't supposed to matter. Small cash withdrawals in regular intervals, always under amounts that might raise questions, always from branches across town. Caleb's money moved like it was trying not to be noticed. Then a name surfaced in the background of a security consulting company that had no website and no real office address, the kind of business that existed mostly to wash intentions clean. Silas Crow. The name hit Grim like an old bruise. Crow had once worn a badge, not a hero's badge, a survivor's badge. A man who had learned how to bend procedure, how to intimidate without leaving marks, how to make victims doubt their own memory. He'd left the department under unknown circumstances, which usually meant someone high up had protected him from consequences in exchange for silence. Now he sold fear as a service. Grim told Axel and Rook late one night at the clubhouse. Rain again, tapping against steel like it wanted in. Crow's close, Grim said, sliding a printed photo across the table. A hard-eyed man in a windbreaker, standing near a vehicle, looking nowhere and everywhere at once. Rook studied the picture. He's the one watching her. Yeah, Grim replied. Caleb's paying him, not through checks. Through cash, third-party payments, and a shell account that smells like rot. Axel's jaw tightened. How long until Crow makes a move? Grim didn't answer immediately. That silence was an answer. Outside, a bike engine roared somewhere distant, then faded. Inside, the clubhouse felt tighter. Legal delays piled up like concrete blocks. Rook Calder was fighting in court, but courts had their own gravity. Emergency motions weren't always treated like emergencies. Hearings were set days out, then weeks. Paperwork got lost. Clerks moved slow. Judges hesitated because Caleb wore a clean name like armor. Every delay was a gift to the predator. Lena felt it in her bones. Every night, she woke to the sound of a car door closing outside, or a footstep in the hallway, or nothing at all, which was somehow worse. Fear returned in waves, and when it hit Noah too. He began sleeping in his clothes. He packed his backpack without being told. He flinched at knocks. A child should not live like that, Rook noticed because he noticed everything that mattered. One evening, after Ren called to say the hearing had been pushed again, Lena finally broke. Not screaming. Not sobbing. Just the quiet kind of collapse where the body sits down because it forgets how to hold itself up. I thought the cameras would make him stop, she whispered. Rook sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He didn't offer empty comfort, he offered truth. Cameras don't stop a man like him, he said. They just force him to change tactics. Lena's eyes lifted. So what do I do? Rook looked at Noah, who was drawing at the coffee table. The kid pressed hard with the pencil, lines dark and angry. You keep breathing, Rook said. And we keep showing up. Lena swallowed. Why? It wasn't a challenge. It was disbelief. The kind abused people carried like a second skin. Rook's gaze stayed steady. Because someone did it for me. Axel had heard pieces of Rook's past, but Lena hadn't, and something in her, something desperate and human, needed to understand why a man like him would put his club at risk for a stranger. So Rook told her, stripped down and real. He spoke about the time he almost didn't make it out of his own life. About the nights he'd been a danger to himself and everyone around him. About the moment he sat on a curb behind a closed shop, convinced he had nothing left worth saving. He spoke about Tommy Valdez, how a biker had pulled up beside him and stayed, no speeches, no judgment, just presence. That's the code, Rook said. Not the patches, not the bikes. The code is simple. Nobody gets to quit alone. Lena's face crumpled, not with pity, but with recognition. She understood that kind of darkness. She'd lived next to it. She'd slept beside it. She'd carried it like a bruise nobody saw. Noah looked up from his drawing. Did you used to be scared too? He asked Rook, voice small. Rook nodded once. Yeah, kid. I was scared. Noah studied him like he was trying to measure truth. Then he went back to his paper, drawing slower now, lines less violent. It was the tiniest change, but it mattered. Outside the apartment, pressure rose from another direction. Law enforcement watched the bikers harder than they watched Caleb. Squad cars lingered at the edge of the neighborhood. Officers ran plates. They checked for warrants that didn't exist. They asked questions in tones that said, "You look like trouble, so you must be trouble." It didn't matter that the Covenant had complied. It didn't matter that their cameras had captured Caleb's rage. Leather made people nervous. Suits made people comfortable. Axel expected it. He'd been dealing with that bias his whole life. But now the bias became dangerous, because it meant Caleb had space to move while the Covenant got scrutinized. One night, Grimm called Rook with a voice that wasn't usually urgent. "He's closing in," Grimm said. Rook was already reaching for his keys. "Crow?" "Yeah," Grimm replied. "He's been circling the school." "Not just watching. Testing." Rook's stomach tightened. "Testing what?" "Testing response time. Who shows up. Where the blind spots are." Grimm's voice sharpened. "That's what predators do before they grab what they think they're owed." Rook hung up and rode hard, rain stinging his face like needles. His mind replayed one line from Lena's note, the one that still lived under his skin. "He will take my son." Now the clock wasn't just ticking toward a hearing date. It was ticking toward something darker, something that didn't care about court orders. Silas Crow was not a man who waited patiently for paperwork. He was a man who made night feel dangerous again, and as the Covenant tightened their circle around Lena and Noah, the shadow tightened right back, closing distance with the kind of confidence that meant Caleb Vane had decided fear alone wasn't enough anymore. Time narrowed, and everyone could feel it. The cabin was supposed to be quiet. It sat miles outside town where the road stopped pretending it was maintained, tucked behind a curtain of trees that swallowed sound and light. In daylight it looked almost peaceful, weathered wood, a tin roof, a porch that creaked under honest weight. At night, it became something else entirely. Out there, the world didn't have streetlights or neighbors or quick help. Out there, a scream could get lost in the wind. That was why Axel chose it, not because it was romantic. Because it was defensible. The Iron Covenant had moved Lena and Noah there after the latest delay in court, after the school surveillance, after Grimm's confirmation that Silas Crow had started testing their response. The cabin wasn't just a hiding place, it was a lime in the dirt. A place where the club could control angles, cameras, and distance. They had installed motion sensors along the tree line. Battery lights. A simple perimeter alarm that would howl loud enough to wake the dead if anything crossed the wrong path. Axel didn't trust luck. He trusted preparation. And Rook trusted the feeling in his gut that said Caleb Vane wasn't done. In town, Caleb's mask had cracked on camera. In court, Wren had forced him into a corner with motions and evidence. In the public eye, his reputation had started to wobble. Not collapse. People clung to their comfort stories, but wobble. That wobble was deadly. Predators didn't accept losing. They didn't accept being told no. They didn't accept that a woman's fear could become a weapon against them. When the system stopped bending, they went around it. When the daylight became dangerous, they moved in darkness, and then Caleb vanished. No phone pings, no credit card charges, no tracked vehicle. His office assistant told police he had taken a personal retreat. His church contact said he was praying. His public image stayed clean because disappearance could be framed as virtue when you wore the right suit. But Grimm saw through it. He found the last cash withdrawal. He found the rented vehicle paid through a third party. He found Silas Crow's sudden silence. The kind of silence that meant the hired shadow was no longer watching because the predator was moving in person. Grimm called Axel just after midnight. "He's off grid," Grimm said. Not hiding, hunting. Axel didn't ask how Grimm knew. He asked the only question that mattered. Where? Grimm's voice hardened. Toward the cabin. The cabin was dark when Rook stepped out onto the porch, boots quiet against old wood. The air smelled like pine and wet soil. A thin fog drifted between the trees, turning the world into layers of shadow. Somewhere inside, Lena slept in a back room with Noah curled close, the boy's small body pressed against his mother like he still believed she could shield him from everything. Rook didn't blame him for that belief, he just refused to let it be tested. He stood on the porch, scanning, listening. Around him, Covenant members held positions. Two near the rear of the cabin. one on the west side where the trees opened into a narrow clearing. Axel had posted Bear inside, closest to Lena and Noah, because Bear wasn't just muscle, he was steadiness. Doc was nearby too, medical kit open, flashlight ready. Cameras were mounted on the porch corners, angled outward. Grim had insisted on it. "If he comes," Grim had said earlier, "we don't let him vanish back into myth." Rook's hand rested near the inside of his vest, not on a weapon like a cowboy, but on his phone and a small flashlight. He had no interest in looking heroic. He had interest in making it through the night, with everyone breathing. Minutes passed, like hours. Then it happened. A sound cut through the dark, sharp, electronic wrong. The perimeter alarm screamed. Not once. Not a test. Not an animal brushing too close. A full, sustained howl that ripped the quiet apart and sent adrenaline flooding every vein. Rook moved instantly, not rushing, but snapping into the motion he'd trained into himself. He stepped off the porch and angled toward the sound, keeping the cabin behind him. Axel's voice cracked through the radio in Rook's ear short, controlled. Positions. Lights off. Cameras on. Nobody goes alone. Rook didn't need reminding. He was already moving with the knowledge that one wrong step could make the cabin a trap instead of a refuge. The alarm kept wailing, echoing through the trees like a warning siren to anyone within miles. If Caleb was out there, he already knew they were awake. That meant stealth was over. That meant the next move would be force. Rook saw the first flash of light through the trees, a beam cutting low, sweeping side to side. Not a flashlight held by someone who was scared. A beam held by someone searching. Then he saw a silhouette. A man moving between trunks with purpose, not stumbling, not hesitating. A shape that belonged to confidence and entitlement, as if the woods were just another place that should part for him. Rook's pulse stayed steady. His mind went cold. He stepped forward just enough that his outline became visible in the darkness beyond the cabin lights. "Stop right there," Rook called, voice firm, carrying. The silhouette halted. A pause. Then the man stepped into a thin break in the trees, and the dim light caught his face. Caleb Vane looked nothing like he did in town. No pressed suit, no warm smile, no polished charm. He wore dark clothes meant to blend in, hair slightly disordered, eyes bright with something that wasn't fear. It was fury. And in his hands, he held a rifle. Rook didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't reach suddenly for anything. He kept his hands where cameras could see them, where the night could see them. "Caleb," Rook said, like naming him was part of stripping the mask away. "You're trespassing." Caleb's mouth curled into a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Get out of my way." Rook's voice stayed even. "You don't own anyone." Caleb laughed, quiet, ugly. "That woman is unstable. She kidnapped my son. You people don't know what you're interfering with." The words sounded practiced, like lines he'd said into mirrors and courtrooms, but out here, surrounded by trees and truth, they didn't land the same. Out here, there was no audience to charm. Rook took one slow step sideways, positioning himself fully between Caleb and the cabin. A wall made of skin and bone and stubbornness. Behind him, he heard movement inside, Bear shifting, Doc whispering, Lena waking. The alarm had done its job. Everyone was aware. Caleb lifted the rifle slightly, not fully aiming, but making the point. "You think cameras make you safe?" Caleb said. "You think your little club can protect her from a father?" Rook's jaw tightened. "A father doesn't hunt his kid in the dark with a rifle." Caleb's eyes snapped. The mask was gone now, fully. No charm left to hide behind. "She poisoned him against me," Caleb hissed. "She made him lie. He belongs to me." That word "belongs" hung in the air like smoke. Rook felt it in his chest, the ugly truth of it. The core of Caleb's sickness. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about family. It was about ownership. Rook's voice dropped, heavy and final. "Love isn't control." For a moment, Caleb looked almost confused, like he'd never heard that said aloud with certainty. Then his face twisted again. Rage surged. The kind of rage that came when a man realized his power had limits. He raised the rifle. Everything slowed. Rook didn't think about being brave. He thought about Noah's small hands gripping his mother's sleeve. He thought about Lena's note. He thought about Tommy Valdez sitting beside him years ago, refusing to let him quit alone. He planted his feet. Behind him, a light flicked on inside the cabin. Someone moving, someone panicking, and Caleb's eyes flashed toward it like a predator spotting prey. Rook moved without hesitation. He stepped forward, closing distance just enough to force Caleb's focus back on him. "Look at me," Rook commanded. Caleb's finger tightened. The shot came like thunder. A crack that shattered the night and echoed through the trees, bouncing off trunks, rolling outward like the woods themselves were shouting the truth back. Rook felt impact, not in his chest, not in his head, but close enough to taste danger. The bullet tore into a tree behind him, splintering bark into the air. Wood fragments stung his cheek. He didn't move backward. Axel's voice roared from somewhere in the dark. "Drop it." Lights snapped on. Covenant flashlights and mounted beams flooding the clearing, turning the woods into a harsh stage. Cameras captured everything. Every angle. Every breath. Every second of Caleb Vane holding a rifle at a man who stood unarmed in front of a cabin. Caleb blinked against the sudden brightness, and for the first time he looked unsure. That hesitation was all it took. Rook lunged, not reckless, not wild. A controlled move aimed at the rifle, at the barrel, at redirecting. He slammed into Caleb's space, forcing the weapon offline. Caleb fought like a cornered animal, strong with desperation, but he wasn't fighting a victim anymore. He was fighting a man who had survived worse and refused to bend. They struggled for a heartbeat, one brutal, breathless moment in the mud and pine needles. Then another shot rang out. This time, it wasn't Caleb's. Axel had fired low, precise, the kind of shot meant to stop without killing. Caleb jerked and collapsed, the rifle dropping from his hands. A dark stain spread on his leg, soaking through fabric. He hit the ground hard, gasping, eyes wide, not with pain alone, but with shock. Shock that he could be brought down. Shock that the dark had failed him. Doc was already moving, kneeling beside Caleb with gloved hands, because the Covenant didn't execute people. They delivered them to consequences alive. "Stay still," Doc ordered, voice cold and professional. "You're not dying tonight." Caleb's face contorted. "You can't do this." "You." Rook stood over him, chest heaving, rain mixing with sweat. He looked down at the man who had hidden behind respectability, who had terrorized a woman and child, who had believed the world owed him obedience. Rook's voice was quiet, but it carried like iron. "This is what you don't understand," he said. "The dark doesn't belong to you anymore." In the cabin doorway, Lena appeared, bare behind her holding Noah close. Noah's face was pale, eyes wide, but he was watching. Watching the truth happen. Watching the monster bleed like any other man. Police sirens grew louder in the distance, summoned by the alarm, by the gunshot, by the fact that this time there would be no story Caleb could spin. Cameras kept rolling. Fear became fact. And for the first time, Caleb Vane was no longer a respectable secret. He was evidence. The sirens reached the cabin long before the adrenaline drained from anyone's veins. Red and blue lights cut through the trees, bouncing off wet bark and low fog, turning the clearing into something unreal. Law enforcement arrived to a scene that could not be explained away. A wounded man on the ground, a rifle lying in the mud, cameras still rolling from every angle, and witnesses who had seen everything from start to finish. Caleb Vane was loaded into an ambulance under guard, his protests slurred by pain and disbelief. This time, there was no room for charm. No private hallway conversations. No quiet favors called in behind closed doors. The evidence was loud. The evidence was visual. And the evidence followed him all the way to the hospital and beyond. Arrests came quickly after that. Not just for the confrontation at the cabin, but for what the confrontation exposed. Stalking. Intimidation. Attempted kidnapping. Assault with a firearm. When Grimm's findings were added, cash withdrawals, shell accounts, payments tied to Silas Crow, the case expanded like a fracture running through stone. Crow was picked up within days, his intimidation campaign collapsing under the weight of records he never thought anyone would connect. Caleb's world, once protected by reputation, folded in on itself. For Lena Cross, the days after felt unreal in a different way. Fear did not vanish overnight. Trauma did not politely pack its bags. But something fundamental had shifted. She woke up, and the room felt quieter. She walked outside and did not immediately scan for threats. Her voice, once hesitant and apologetic, grew steadier each time she used it. In court, she spoke without lowering her eyes. She told the truth the way it lived in her body, without embellishment, without hesitation. When defense attorneys tried to twist her words, she didn't fold. She corrected them. When they questioned her credibility, she pointed to the videos, the witnesses, the night in the woods that no one could erase. Noah changed too, in ways that were small but profound. He slept through the night for the first time in months. When a door slammed somewhere in the distance, he didn't bolt upright in panic. He laughed more. He asked normal questions. He stopped packing his backpack every night, as if escape was a daily requirement. The world felt safer, not perfect, but possible. The courtroom became a place of reckoning. Rook Calder moved with precision, weaving timelines together, laying patterns side by side until denial became impossible. One by one, other women stepped forward. Faces that had stayed hidden for years now sat in the open, shoulders squared. Their stories matched in details that predators never realized, repeated. The same threats, the same promises, the same consequences for speaking up. They stood together, not as victims, but as witnesses. The judge listened differently this time. Not because the system had suddenly grown compassionate, but because the system had been cornered by truth that refused to stay quiet. Motions were granted. Custody protections were enforced. Criminal proceedings advanced with a momentum that could not be stalled by influence or donation. Caleb Vane was no longer a respected name. He was a defendant. When sentencing finally came, it was heavy. Consecutive charges. Long years. Consequences that matched the harm he had tried to hide. The courtroom was silent when the decision was read, not out of shock, but out of finality. Something had ended there. The Iron Covenant did not attend for applause. They sat in the back, leather muted, presence steady, cameras off this time. Their work wasn't about being seen when it was convenient. It was about being there when it mattered. When it was over, they didn't linger. They returned to the road the same way they always did, quietly. Bikes rolled out one by one. No victory laps. No celebration. Just engines humming and miles ahead. They were changed, though. Not hardened, but sharpened. Reminded of why the code existed in the first place. Because sometimes showing up rewrote someone's future. Rook Calder didn't give speeches. He didn't accept thanks easily. When Lena hugged him goodbye outside the courthouse, he stiffened for half a second, then returned it with care, like he understood the weight of human contact after trauma. "You saved us," she said. Rook shook his head. "You did the hardest part." She smiled then, not wide, not dramatic, but real. The kind of smile that came from standing on solid ground after years of slipping. As Rook rode away, the city shrinking behind him, he felt no rush of triumph. No need for closure. He felt what he always felt after things like this, a quiet certainty. He had been present when it counted. That was enough. And somewhere behind him, a woman and a child were building a life that no longer revolved around fear. Monsters rarely announce themselves with claws and fangs. Most of the time, they wear pressed suits, warm smiles, and familiar titles. They learn how to speak softly in public while breaking people in private. They survive because the world prefers comfort over confrontation, and because fear is easier to dismiss when it doesn't look frightening. This story is not about loud heroics or dramatic rescues. It is about quiet courage, the kind that writes a note instead of screaming, the kind that believes survival is worth risking disbelief. It is about the truth that help does not always arrive in familiar forms. Sometimes it shows up on two wheels wrapped in leather and scars, carried by people society was taught to fear. Brotherhood is not words or symbols. It is action taken when walking away would be easier. Honor is not violence. It is restraint, discipline, and choosing to protect rather than dominate. Redemption is not a moment. It is a lifetime of showing up for others because someone once showed up for you. Appearances lie. The most dangerous men are often the ones everyone trusts without question. And the real heroes are often the ones who stand quietly between fear and the innocent, asking for nothing in return except the chance to keep someone from quitting alone. Sometimes, it only takes one choice to break a cycle that's been crushing lives for years. One note, one moment of courage. One group of people willing to show up when it matters most. If this story hit you, if it made you think differently about who the real heroes are, take a second to show your support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it tonight. And now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now, and do you believe heroes always look the way we expect them to?